It was a night like any other. An old, rusted school bus traveled down a deserted road, carrying a group of students home after a soccer game. But something was about to change. Suddenly, the vehicle made an unscheduled stop. The town sign, covered in dust and almost illegible, swayed in the wind. "Where are we?" "This wasn't supposed to be a stop," asked one of the students, looking out the window with a confused expression. The driver, with his back turned, remained silent. In the background, the wind howled, doors creaked, and distant footsteps echoed through the ghost town. One of the students suggested getting off to stretch their legs. The group hesitated but eventually agreed. They didn't know it, but that would be the last stop of their lives. A few hours earlier, the atmosphere had been completely different. The students were excited, celebrating their victory in the soccer game. They laughed, sang, and clapped inside the bus, while the driver, silent, watched them through the rearview mirror. He seemed tense, but no one noticed. After all, it was just another normal day, right? The bus left the school, taking them home as it always did. No one could have imagined that this would be the last time they would see their families. Back. In the present, the students got off the bus, stretching their legs after the long trip. The driver warned, "Don't wander too far." But they laughed, thinking he was overreacting. The town seemed calm, almost peaceful. They began to explore, laughing and taking photos. The atmosphere was strangely silent, but no one seemed to care. After all, what could go wrong in a small, deserted town? However, something in the air felt off. The wind carried a metallic smell, and the silence was unsettling. But at that moment, they still didn't know what awaited them. As they walked through the town, the students began to realize that something was terribly wrong. The streets were deserted, but not just that. Abandoned cars blocked the roads, house doors swung open in the wind, and broken windows reflected the faint light of dusk. It was as if everyone had fled in a hurry, leaving everything behind. Suddenly, strange sounds began to emerge. Whispers seemed to come from all directions, low, echoing laughter, and the dragging of chains on the asphalt. One of the students joked, "Is someone playing a prank on us?" But the smile vanished from his face when a shadow moved quickly behind a house. He warned the others, but no one believed him. "You're seeing things," they said. The tension in the air was palpable. The group decided to return to the bus, but when they got there, they found the vehicle empty. The driver had disappeared. The doors were open, and the engine was still running, but there was no sign of him. "Where did he go?" asked one of the students, her voice trembling. It was then that they realized they were not alone. Something was watching them from the shadows, something that was not human. And worse, that town was not just a ghost town, it was a trap. Suddenly the shadows came to life. Grotesque creatures emerged from the darkness, with distorted forms, glowing eyes, and quick, erratic movements. The students screamed, running in all directions, but the creatures were everywhere. They found themselves cornered, not knowing where to go. Amid the chaos, the group found an abandoned church. The doors were broken, and satanic symbols were painted on the walls. Inside, ancient, torn scriptures covered the floor. One of the students, curious, picked up a piece of paper and read aloud, "Welcome to the portal to hell." The silence that followed was cut by a piercing scream from outside. They tried to hide inside the church, but the creatures soon found them. Glass shattered, and the shadows invaded the place. In a desperate act, the group managed to escape through the back door. But one of the students wasn't fast enough. He was pulled into the darkness, his scream echoing through the town. Running back to the bus, they hoped to find refuge. But when they got there, the driver was still missing. The creatures surrounded them, laughing and whispering in an unknown language. In the center of the town, the portal began to glow intensely, emitting a reddish light that illuminated the sky. They were cornered, with no way out. The portal called to them, and the creatures pushed them toward it. It was as if the entire town was alive, ready to swallow them whole. It was then that the driver reappeared. He emerged from the shadows, holding a rusty knife, his face marked by an expression of pain and guilt. "I had no choice," he said, his voice trembling. The students looked at him, confused and terrified. He revealed the truth. Years ago, his daughter was on the verge of death, and he made a pact with the devil to save her. The town was the portal to hell, and the students were the price he had to pay. "I just wanted to save my daughter," he repeated, as if that justified everything. The students tried to argue, to beg, but the driver shook his head. "There's no escape," he said, closing the bus doors. "The pact has already been made." He started the engine, and the bus began to move on its own toward the portal. The shadowy creatures surrounded them, laughing and screaming. As the red light of the portal grew brighter and brighter, the students realized there was no turning back. They were trapped in an infernal trap, and the driver was just another pawn in the devil's game. The bus moved toward the portal, pulled by an invisible force. Inside, chaos reigned. Glass shattered, lights flickered, and the students screamed, trying to hold on to something, anything, to steady themselves. The shadowy creatures ran alongside the vehicle, their distorted forms reflected in the windows. One of the students tried to open the door, but it was locked. Another grabbed a fire extinguisher and began to strike the windows, but they wouldn't break. "We need to get out of here!" shouted one of the students, her voice almost lost in the deafening noise. Suddenly, the bus began to shake violently. The portal was now right ahead, a pulsating mass of bright red light. The shadowy creatures laughed as if they knew the battle was lost. A blinding flash illuminated the inside of the bus. The students covered their eyes, but it was useless. The light enveloped them, and the sound of the bus engine was replaced by absolute silence. When the light finally dissipated, the bus was empty. The shadowy creatures were gone, and the portal closed, leaving only the ghost town and the howling wind. The driver, now alone, fell to his knees, clutching the rusty knife. "I just wanted to save my daughter," he whispered, before disappearing into the shadows. The bus, now silent and empty, continued to move forward, carrying with it the secret of the last stop. Years passed. The ghost town remained abandoned, like a secret, forgotten by time. Until, on a night like any other, the bus reappeared. It emerged out of nowhere, covered in dust and with deep claw marks on its sides. Inside, there was no sign of the students. The seats were destroyed, bloodstains covered the floor, and the air was heavy with the smell of sulfur. The driver was not there. The bus was completely empty, as if it had never had any passengers. The school bus swayed gently along the road as the students laughed, chatted, and listened to music. The atmosphere was light, typical of an ordinary day after school. João, sitting in the middle of the bus, glanced back almost without thinking. His eyes landed on the back of the vehicle, where an empty seat caught his attention. Something was wrong. The seatbelt was fastened, as if someone were sitting there. "Hey, did you guys see that?" João asked, pointing to the seat. Maria, Pedro, and Ana turned around, laughing at the situation. "Relax, João. It must have gotten stuck," said Pedro, making a joke. But before anyone could respond, a sharp noise echoed from the empty seat. Something moved. The laughter died on their lips, and the air grew heavy. The seat was empty, but something or someone was there. The bus continued on its way, but the mood had shifted. João couldn't take his eyes off the empty seat. He was naturally curious, always noticing details that others ignored. Maria, sitting beside him, tried to rationalize the situation. "It's probably just a faulty seatbelt, João. Don't get paranoid." Pedro, the group's jokester, tried to lighten the mood. "Oh, sure. The ghost of the school bus. He just wants a ride home." Everyone laughed, but the laughter sounded forced. Anna, sitting in front, remained silent. She was quiet, sensitive, and from the beginning, she seemed to sense something the others didn't. The bus was nearly empty, with only a few students scattered across the seats. The driver, a middle-aged man, seemed distant, his eyes fixed on the road and unresponsive to the kids' chatter. The vehicle was old, with worn seats and lights that flickered occasionally. The constant hum of the engine created a claustrophobic atmosphere, as if the bus were a world apart, isolated from everything around it. João looked back at the empty seat. The seatbelt was still fastened. He felt a chill run down his spine but tried to ignore it. After all, it was just an empty seat. Or was it? Minutes passed, but the tension on the bus only grew. Suddenly, a backpack on the floor near the empty seat was yanked sharply under the seat. Everyone saw it. Maria tried to explain. It must have slipped. But before she could finish, the seatbelt on the empty seat moved on its own, as if someone were adjusting it. João couldn't take it anymore. "This isn't normal," he said, standing up to investigate. Maria grabbed his arm. "No, João, leave it alone. It's better not to mess with this." Pedro, who had been making jokes earlier, was now pale. I think she's right," he murmured, his voice trembling. Anna, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "Someone is here with us," she said, staring fixedly at the empty seat. "I can feel it." Her eyes were glazed, as if she were seeing something the others couldn't. That's when they heard it. Whispers. Low, almost imperceptible, but there they were. Coming from the empty seat. No one could make out the words, but the sound was unsettling, like a distant voice filled with pain. João sat back down, his heart racing. The cold inside the bus seemed to intensify, and the lights flickered rapidly, like a warning. Something was wrong, very wrong. The atmosphere on the bus became unbearable. Pedro, trying to mask his fear, stood up. "I'm going to the bathroom. I need to calm down," he said, forcing a smile. The group watched him walk to the back of the bus and enter the bathroom. Minutes passed, and he didn't return. "Pedro?" called João, standing up. No one answered. Maria and João went to the bathroom, but the door was locked. "Pedro, are you in there?" shouted Maria, banging on the door. Silence. With some effort, they managed to open the door. The bathroom was empty. Pedro had disappeared. Before they could process what had happened, the bus door opened on its own with a metallic creak. The cold night wind rushed in, chilling the air. "What's happening?" whispered Maria, clutching João's arm. That's when Maria saw something on the floor near the empty seat. It was an old, faded photograph. She picked it up with trembling hands. The image showed an unfamiliar student with a sad smile, sitting in the exact same empty seat. On the back of the photo was written, "Lucas, 2005, Anna," who had been silent, until then, began to act strangely. Her eyes closed, and she started speaking in a voice that wasn't hers. "Lucas is angry," she said, in a deep, hoarse tone. "He died here. Drowned. The bus crashed into the river. He never left." João and Maria exchanged terrified glances. Anna continued, "He wants revenge. He wants you to suffer like he did." Then she pointed to the empty seat. "He's waiting for you." João and Maria, still trying to process Anna's words, began searching the bus for answers. That's when João found something under a seat, an old yellowed, torn newspaper. The headline caught his attention. "Tragedy at the river. School bus crashes. 1 dead." The photo showed the same bus they were in, submerged in the dark waters of a river. Maria read aloud in a low voice. "Lucas, 16, was the only fatality in the accident. The bus skidded off the road during a storm and plunged into the river. His body was never recovered." João looked at the empty seat, his heart pounding. "He's here, trapped on this bus," he said, almost in a whisper. Anna, still in a trance, interrupted. "He hasn't rested. He's furious. He wants you to feel what he felt." She pointed again to the empty seat, her voice echoing like a grim warning. "He's waiting for you." The air in the bus felt heavier than ever, and the lights flickered rapidly, as if Lucas's spirit were manifesting. João and Maria knew they couldn't ignore what was happening. It was time to confront the invisible passenger. João and Maria decided to act. "We need to communicate with him," said João, pulling out a voice recorder from his pocket. "If he's here, maybe we can understand what he wants." Maria hesitated but agreed. They approached the empty seat, the recorder on. "Lucas," João began, his voice trembling. "If you're here, please give us a sign." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the recorder picked up something. Low, distorted whispers. "You will pay," a hoarse, angry voice echoed. Maria clutched João's arm, her eyes filled with terror. Suddenly, the bus began to shake violently, as if being rocked by an invisible force. The lights flickered wildly, and objects flew down the aisle, thrown by unseen hands. João and Maria clung to the seats, trying to stay upright. "Lucas, we understand your pain," shouted João, trying to make himself heard over the chaos. "But this won't bring you back." The response came in the form of a deafening scream, seeming to come from all directions at once. Anna, who had been standing at the back of the bus, was yanked sharply toward the empty seat. "He's taking me!" she screamed, desperate. João and Maria tried to reach her, but it was too late. Anna was dragged into the empty seat and disappeared, as if swallowed by the air. The bus stopped shaking, and silence fell. João and Maria were alone, staring at the empty seat where Anna had been just seconds before. The seatbelt was fastened. Again. The bus came to a complete stop, and the silence was almost deafening. João and Maria looked around, panting. Lucas's spirit seemed to have left, but the empty seat was still there, the seatbelt fastened, a sinister reminder of what had just happened. Is it over now?" Maria asked, her voice trembling. João didn't answer. He approached the empty seat, staring at the seatbelt. "João, don't!" Maria shouted, but it was too late. João sat down in the seat, as if challenging whatever remained of the spirit. The moment he settled in, the seatbelt moved on its own, fastening around him. He tried to stand up, but couldn't. "Maria, something's holding me," he shouted, desperate. Maria tried to pull him, but her hands passed right through him, as if he had become invisible. João looked at her, his face filled with terror. I can't get out," he whispered, before disappearing completely. The bus began to move again, as if nothing had happened. Maria, alone and in shock, got off at the next stop. She looked back at the bus as it continued on its way. At the back, the empty seat remained, the seatbelt fastened. It was just an ordinary school bus, until the day it became a death trap. Abandoned in a junkyard, covered in rust and deep scratches that seemed to form a distorted face, it shouldn't have been operational. But there it was, with its headlights flickering and the engine roaring as if something or someone was in control. And those who entered it that day would never forget what they saw, or what nearly killed them. It all started on an ordinary day at Greenfield High School. Among the students, 5 friends stood out. Lucas, the brave leader; Anna, the smart student; Pedro, the jokester; Clara, the shy one; and Rita, the rebel. They were inseparable, always together in the hallways, in class, and of course on the school bus that took them home. No one noticed anything unusual that day. The driver, a middle-aged man with a distant gaze, seemed like just another tired employee. He didn't say a word as the students boarded the bus one by one. What they didn't know was that this bus was no longer just a vehicle. Something sinister was about to happen, and none of them would be prepared for what was coming next. Shortly after the bus left the school, the students began to notice that something was wrong. The driver didn't respond to their questions, didn't even look back. His face was pale, almost expressionless, as if he were in a trance. And then, the driver disappeared. Just like that. The driver's seat was empty, but the bus kept accelerating, veering off its usual route and onto a deserted road. The students looked at each other, confused and scared. Lucas tried to open the doors, but they were locked. Pedro banged on the windows, but they wouldn't break. "What the hell is going on?" Rita shouted as the bus picked up speed. The students tried to get attention by banging on the windows and shouting, but the road was empty. The bus seemed to be driving itself, as if it had a mind of its own. They were trapped in a bus that no longer obeyed the laws of physics or reason. The bus entered a dark, winding road, accelerating down the deserted path as the desperate students tried to make sense of what was happening. Panic began to spread among the students. The bus didn't stop. On the contrary, it seemed to be speeding up, as if guided by an invisible force. Suddenly, a backpack flew down the aisle, hitting a seat with a loud thud. The students screamed, looking around, trying to understand what was happening. "This isn't possible!" Anna exclaimed, holding onto her seat as the bus swayed violently. Windows began to shatter on their own, shards of glass flying through the air. The wind rushed in, scattering papers and objects down the aisle. And then, the shadows began to move. Indistinct shapes seemed to lurk in the dark corners of the bus. The face of the dead driver briefly appeared in the rearview mirror, making Clara scream. "Did you see that?" she asked, pointing at the mirror, but the image was already gone. Lucas tried to stay calm, but even he was scared. "We need to get out of here," he shouted, trying again to open the doors without success. The bus was now completely out of control, speeding down a road none of them recognized. Night was falling quickly, and the darkness around them only heightened the terror. The students huddled at the back of the bus, trying to shield themselves from the flying objects and the shattering windows. "This isn't normal!" Pedro yelled, holding a backpack as a shield. "What the hell is happening to this bus?" The bus took a sharp turn, nearly flipping over, and the students were thrown from side to side. They were cornered, not knowing where the bus was taking them or what awaited them at the end of that road. It was then that Anna found something that would change everything. An old, crumpled, dusty newspaper was under one of the seats. She grabbed it, struggling to keep her balance as the bus continued to sway. Anna opened the newspaper, revealing an old headline, "Fatal accident involving school bus, driver dies in cliff plunge." "Look at this," she shouted, showing the newspaper to the others. The students gathered around her, trying to read the headline as the bus shook. The photo showed the same bus they were in, wrecked at the bottom of a cliff. The driver, "He died here in this bus," Anna said, her voice trembling. The students looked at each other, terrified. Lucas finally understood. He's here. The driver's spirit. He's controlling the bus. The group realized they were dealing with something far beyond a simple accident. The spirit of the dead driver was possessing the bus, seeking revenge, or perhaps just company. "We need to stop this before it's too late," Rita said, determined. They began searching for something that could help them escape. Anna suggested using the fire extinguisher to disable the engine, while Lucas tried to find a way to break the windows. Time was running out, and the bus continued to accelerate into the unknown. The bus sped faster and faster, heading straight for the cliff. The abyss was right there, and time was running out. Lucas grabbed the fire extinguisher and began moving toward the driver's seat, fighting against the violent swaying of the bus. Anna tried to help him, holding him steady so he wouldn't fall. "We need to disable the engine," Lucas shouted, trying to pry open the bus's control panel with the extinguisher. Pedro and Clara tried to kick out the windows, but the glass seemed indestructible. Rita searched for something she could use as a tool, but the bus swayed so violently that she nearly fell. Suddenly, the radio turned on again, emitting a distorted voice. "No one escapes." The students froze for a moment, looking at each other in terror. The voice echoed through the bus, amplifying their fear. "This isn't real. This isn't real," Clara murmured, covering her ears. Lucas finally managed to open the control panel and began striking the engine with the extinguisher, trying to disable it. The bus swayed even more, as if fighting back. "It's working!" Anna shouted as the engine began to sputter. But it was too late. The cliff was right ahead. "Jump!" Lucas yelled, dropping the extinguisher and running to the back door. The nutty students gathered at the door, trying to force it open. With one last effort, it gave way, and the strong wind rushed in. One at a time, Lucas ordered, holding the door for the others. The students jumped from the moving bus, tumbling to the ground and rolling away from the road. The bus, now out of control, continued toward the cliff. Lucas was the last to jump, but he hesitated. For a moment, looking back inside the bus. In the driver's seat, he saw the face of the dead driver, smiling at him. "Lucas, jump!" Rita shouted, pulling him out. He leaped at the last second, and the bus plunged over the cliff, exploding into a fireball that lit up the night. The students lay on the ground, injured and traumatized, but alive. We're alive," Clara murmured, still in shock. But the relief didn't last long. Something was wrong. The next day, the students returned to school, still shaken by what they had experienced. Injured and traumatized, they gathered at the bus. "Stop," hesitant to board the next vehicle. This isn't possible," Anna whispered, her eyes filled with terror. The bus opened its doors, as if inviting them in. Some ghosts never rest,